Okay, so first of all, let's talk about wholes. In number 1, what I notice in number 1 is that there's an x plus 2 on the top and the bottom. Because there is an x plus 2 on the top and the bottom, I know that there is a hole at x equals negative 2. And because there is an x minus 2 on the bottom, but not 1 on the top, I know that there is a vertical asymptote at x equals positive 2. And then lastly, I look for a horizontal asymptote. And what I notice is that if I were to multiply all the stuff on the top, I would see x squared plus 2x. If I were to multiply everything on the bottom, and you FOIL it out, you would see x squared minus 4. If that's confusing, see me later. And I notice that in these, I see that both the top and the bottom's highest power are both x squareds. Since they're the same, I divide them. X squared divided by x squared is 1. So I know that I have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 1. Number 2. One of the key strategies when things aren't factored like they were in number 1 is to factor them. So you'll notice in number 1, after that was factored, I actually multiplied it out just to see what was going on with the biggest powers. We can also go backwards to see what's going on. So in number 2, what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to factor this. So this is really the same as x times x plus 3 on the top. And on the bottom I can't really do anything, so I leave it as x plus 3. And oh my, I notice that top and bottom, I see this x plus 3 thing. What does that mean? That means there's a hole. So there's a hole at x equals negative 3. Is there a vertical asymptote? No. There's nothing on the bottom left over after those reduce out. But there might be a horizontal asymptote. So I go look, and I see that on the top, I have an x squared is the biggest power. On the bottom, x is the biggest power. The top is bigger than the bottom. Is there a a horizontal asymptote? No. So the only thing that's going on here is a hole, and that's it. There are no vertical or horizontal asymptotes. Number 3. Again, this is not in factored format, so I'm going to try to factor it to see if there's anything that I can't discover right away. So I factored the top, and we did factoring a long time ago, so if this is a struggle for you, you might need to practice a little more. So this would be x minus 6 and x plus 1 when you factor. And then on the bottom, that's the difference of 2 squares, which is x plus 5 times x minus 5. Are there any holes?
No.
No holes. But on the bottom, I notice that there are 2 things that make my denominator 0. So I know that I have vertical asymptotes at x equals negative 5 and at x equals positive 5. Both. Because they make the denominator 0. And then, in the original equation, I notice that the biggest power is x squared on the top, x squared on the bottom. Since they're the same, I divide. When I divide, that tells me that I have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 1. Number 4 is very similar to number 3. I'm going to factor to begin with. If I factor to begin with, on the top, I have x plus 4 and x minus 4. On the bottom, I'm going to have x plus 4 and x minus 1. Again, the factoring is not your strong suit. You can come see me later and I'll help you out. And I notice that on the top and the bottom, I see these x plus 4s. Same for the top and the bottom. That tells me there's a hole. I have a hole at x equals -4. On the test, you must put the letter, the equal sign, and the number. Letter equals number. If you don't have those parts, you're not getting credit. Also on the bottom, I see this x minus 1 thing that does not reduce out. That tells me that I have a vertical asymptote at x equals +1. And then the last thing that I notice is in the numerator I see an x squared, in the denominator I see an x squared. Those are the largest powers. If I were to divide those two things, that means that I have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 1. Okay, in this last one, it's going to probably take me a couple steps. So the first thing that I notice in number 5 is that the top factors into the difference of two squares, which would be 3x plus 1 and 3x minus 1. But down below, before I get trapped, what I notice is there's a common factor of x, because x goes into everything. So as I look at that, I got to remember to pull out the x first. So I pull out that x, and I see 3x squared plus 5x minus 2. Now, if you didn't see that, that's going to kind of mess you up in the beginning. And as I redo this thing to go a little bit farther, what I know is that I might have to experiment with what's going on in order to figure it out. So the top is going to stay 3x plus 1 and 3x minus 1. That's okay. That doesn't simplify at all. But the bottom, I'm going to have to check and see what happens. So I still have that x on the outside, but if I can factor that into two parentheses, I should see something like the following. Now I know that if I'm doing this right, usually, because math people like to do this, one of the parentheses on the bottom is probably going to match one of the ones on the top. Why not? It's fun. So I know I'm going to have a 3x and an x to get the 3x squared that's in the dark blue parentheses. And to get 2, I have to have a 2 and a 1. So I'm just going to put the 2 back over here, and I'm going to put the 1 over here. And now I have to figure out, how do I get my positive 5x? Well, 3x in the outer times 2 would give me a 6x, and because the 5x is positive, I'm going to make that the plus sign, which means this one's the minus. And then I can check. So 3x times x is the dark 3x squared. Negative 1 times 2 is the negative 2. Negative 1x and positive 6x makes positive 5x, and I factored correctly. If you didn't get it right the first time, that's okay. Try again. On the top and on the bottom, I notice that I see this 3x minus 1. That means to me that I have a hole. I have a hole, whatever makes that parentheses 0. What's going to make that parentheses 0? X equals 1 will not make it 0. 3 times 1 is 3, minus 1 is 2. That's not 0. How do I figure that out? I don't know. Maybe I could go, hey, how is 3x minus 1 going to be equal to 0? Oh, look, it's an equation. I could solve it. Move the 1 over. 3x equals 1. Divided by 3, x equals 1/3. That's where my hole is. So that's how you find your hole when it's not an easy thing just to look at. Solve it for 0. Then on the bottom, I notice that there are two factors. One factor is the x plus 2. What does that mean? that there's a vertical asymptote. So I have a vertical asymptote at x equals -2. But I also notice that there's one more thing down on the bottom. There's this thing, the x. What does that mean? That means that there's also a vertical asymptote at x equals 0. Because a 0 makes that x 0. And then the last thing that I'm supposed to be looking for is what's going on with the horizontal asymptote. Power on the top is 9x squared. Highest power on the bottom is 3x cubed. When the top power is smaller than the bottom power, that means I have a vertical asymptote or a horizontal asymptote of 0. So at y equals 0 is my horizontal asymptote.